Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Judy and I love history, travel, and finding out what makes people tick. Today we're going to dive quite a bit deeper into the city of Madrid on a walking tour. So kick back, relax, and join me in sunny Madrid, today with me as the armchair traveler as your guide. Welcome to our first stop, the Plaza de la Villa, one of the oldest and best preserved in the city, with a wide variety of styles on offer. The square was originally called the Plaza de San Salvador. It was named after a nearby church which no longer exists. The first that we'll look at is the Lujanes house and tower. These are said to be the oldest preserved houses in Madrid. The building, mostly brick, looks pretty solid to me. The tower is designed a little differently. This style comes down to us from defensive towers in medieval castles, although whether there was ever a siege here or not, I cannot tell you. Legend has it that King Francis I of France was imprisoned here after being captured in the Battle of Pavia in 1525, although there are other versions that say that he was just an honored guest here. The more interesting part of the building is this old doorway. It's made from wood and some metal, and it looks really old. I took a photo of it because it seems so on context. It's the oldest door in the oldest building in the city. On the other side of the square is the Casa de la Villa, shown here, and opened in 1692 as City Hall, and kept that job until 2007. This was actually designed for two purposes. It was not only the seat of the city council, but it was also a municipal prison. After the municipal government moved into Palacio de Cibeles, we'll visit that square in a few minutes, in 2007, the Casa de la Villa was left without a job and pretty much abandoned. I'm a little surprised the local authorities didn't tear it down, but they actually repurposed it for municipal offices and official receptions. The center of the square features a statue of a man named Alvaro de Bazan. I had never heard of him, but then again, that's why I always read information plaques on statues. These are usually placed there because someone, at least once upon a time, thought the person pictured should be remembered. Wikipedia tells me he was a leading admiral for the Spanish. He participated in the successful defense of Malta in 1655. He was a key commander on the winning side of the Battle of Lepanto. He led Spanish forces in the successful capture of Tunis from the Ottoman Empire. He played a role in the Spanish conquest of Portugal and led Spanish forces in the capture of the Azores Islands. He was even involved in the planning and preparation of the Spanish Armada. He died before the Armada could ever set sail, which meant that he died with his winning streak kept intact. Almudena Cathedral, the name refers to Our Lady of Almudena, is brand new as cathedrals go. Construction only began here in 1879, although there were several pauses, most notably during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. The two biggest funding sources are the national government and the Catholic Church. Estimates vary, of course, and I think there's some effort to keep it secret, but it appears that the national government is footing around 30 to 40% of the total cost. The building was completed and consecrated in 1993. Although the cathedral sits on the site of a former mosque, or perhaps because of it, the building shows no Moorish influence that I was able to see. The exterior, shown here, is lovely and neoclassical and meant to harmonize with the nearby royal palace. I found these doors, particularly the one called the Monarchy Gateway, to be the most important and impressive part of the exterior. The central door is probably the most interesting, I suppose, because it seemed to be the oddest. Mostly it's filled by people in modern clothing, including one person in a wheelchair. Men, women, and even children are shown along the bottom and along the sides of the doors, but the real action is in the top and middle sections. At the top we see a fairly standard crucifixion scene on the left, and on the right, the significantly larger figure with a crown of lights representing a resurrected Jesus. Above those figures are some angels, two on the left blowing horns and one below them holding a book. The central image of the door shows us the consecration of the cathedral by Pope John Paul II. The Pope is shown standing in front of a priestly throne. Looking on are the clearly identifiable figures of former King Juan Carlos and his queen, Sophia. The main area of the interior is neo-Gothic in style, with lots of pointed arches and groined vaults shown here, but also quite a bit of bright colors. One of the oddest features of the cathedral is what I thought was an elaborately decorated coffin. It turns out it's a monument to a man named Saint Isidore, the farmer, who's venerated as the patron saint of farmers and of the city of Madrid. The ark is gorgeously decorated with paintings showing scenes of his life. The crypt, one of the oldest parts of the cathedral and underneath, is neo-Romanesque in style, with rounded arches, sturdy columns, and simple solid forms that remind me of much older churches. The crypt was dedicated to the Virgin of Aldamena and features Romanesque-style chapels and a notable statue of the Virgin Mary. There's also a tomb here dedicated to a very briefly reigning queen named Maria de las Mercedes de Orleans. She married King Alfonso XII in January of 1878, but died a mere 5 months later, almost certainly from typhoid fever, and possibly after miscarrying a child and heir. Maria was a devoted Catholic who was involved in initiating the project to actually build this cathedral. She and the king laid the foundation stone in April 1883, just 2 months before she died. Since she died long before the cathedral could be finished, she was originally buried at the monastery of El Escorial, but was reinterred here in 2000. Before it was the capital of modern Spain, Madrid was the capital of the Spanish Empire, and before that it was a Christian fortress built securely on a high hill, although nothing of that period survives except the name Puerta del Sol. Before that there was a Moorish castle here. When Philip II moved his capital here, he built a fortress on this site. That burned down, and the building we see today was put up and finished by Philip V. Philip V of Spain was not a Habsburg. He was the first Spanish king from the Bourbon dynasty. He was the son of the French Dauphin and a grandson of the all-powerful Louis XIV, Sun King of France. He was born at Versailles, and he wanted a home, once he got to Spain, to match. He ascended to the throne in 1700 after the death of the last Habsburg king of Spain, Charles II, who died without heir. Philip's accession led to the War of the Spanish Succession, as various European powers contested the idea of having a Bourbon on the Spanish throne. The Bourbons were set to control all of France, all of Spain, and parts of Sicily and southern Italy. Several European powers, including Austria, the Dutch Republic, and Great Britain, formed a grand alliance to stop this. The war ended with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, which allowed Philip to remain king of Spain, but forced him to give up his claim to the French throne. Although there have been several interruptions, the Bourbon dynasty in Spain continues to this day under the current king, Felipe VI. The royal palace remains an official residence of the Spanish royal family, although the last king to actually live here died in 1885. The current king and his family live in a separate palace on the outskirts of the city, as did his father and mother. The palace is now used mostly for state ceremonies, offices, and of course a museum. It must generate significant income. Admission was €8 the last time I was there, and in 2023 there were over 1 million visitors. It remains the largest royal palace in Europe. A building of this size is, of course, always a multi-generational effort. Philip V's son, Charles III, we met him back at the Puerta del Sol, added interior decor in the Italian style, since he'd spent his formative years in Italy. There's always been more than just a trace of snobbery among these Bourbon kings of Spain, at least until lately, who always looked down on the Spanish. They hired and brought in foreign artists to oversee construction and established local Spanish porcelain and tapestry factories to produce copies of works made in Paris or Brussels. Over the years, the palace expanded and was enriched as each Spanish king tried to outdo his predecessor. Nearby, in the Plaza de Oriente, which just means the Eastern Plaza, is a statue of King Felipe IV. This is tribute to one of Spain's most significant Habsburg monarchs, known for his patronage of the arts and for ruling over Spain during a period of both cultural flourishing and political challenges in the 17th century. Philip looks rather better here in bronze than he does in paint. The painting you see here of a man shows us up close the overdeveloped chin and jaw which, along with their physical defects resulting from multi-generational inbreeding, would eventually finish off the line. His son, Charles II, was the end of the Habsburg line. Directly in front of the palace is the Plaza de Armeria. It's an enormous open square facing the cathedral on one side and a great place to photograph it, the palace. Looking at it, you probably should be asking yourself, where are all the cars? The truth is, they apparently built an underground highway here. It must have cost a fortune, but it did make pedestrians like me feel happier and quite a bit safer. If I had to pick just one thing to see inside, I think it would be the Stradivarius room, dedicated to housing an exceptional collection of instruments known as the Spanish Quartet. Antonio Stradivari was a famous Italian instrument maker from the late 1600s and early 1700s. He made violins, cellos, violas, and other string instruments that are considered some of the best ever made. His instruments are known for their beautiful, rich sound and are highly valued by musicians, even today. Each Stradivarius instrument is unique, and because only a few hundred survive, they are not just incredibly rare, but expensive. His skill in shaping the wood and designing the instruments made him a legend in the world of music. The instruments were originally acquired by the Spanish royal family when it was flush and have been kept carefully preserved over the centuries. Unfortunately, I think, they are rarely played, so we really don't know how good they sound or how well they've been preserved. They are occasionally played for special occasions, but due to their fragility, they're mostly just kept on display. There are few things worse, I think, for a stringed instrument than for it to sit in a glass case untouched. This is Las Ventas, the largest bullfighting ring in Spain and probably the most famous in the world. It dates, despite its antique-looking appearance, only from 1931, and at first glance it actually will remind you a bit of some of the smaller Roman-era Colosseums. The architects started with the same basic shape which we use to this day, a round, open-air Colosseum, but added on Moorish influences like the arches you can see above the top row of seats and plenty of ceramic tile decorations. The facility seats nearly 24,000 people. The matador in front of Las Ventas is Santiago Martin, also known as El Viti. He was one of the most prominent and well-known bullfighters in Spain, having performed numerous times here in Las Ventas. He was highly skilled, and he stayed in the game until he was 41 years old. He was smart enough to retire in 1979. Bullfighting goes back to ancient civilizations, where bulls were worshipped and sacrificed to appease the gods. Remains of frescoes in Knossos on Crete show young people vaulting over them. Perhaps this was just the first representation. From there, the spectacle moved to the Roman Empire, where the fights were part of the public games. The Spanish developed bullfighting, possibly some kind of military training or conditioning, although there are no notes. In the 19th century, bullfighting became formalized into a spectacle with matadors, picadors, bandoleros, each playing a role. Today, bullfighting remains quite controversial, although it is still practiced here in Madrid. It's actually banned in Barcelona, where the arena has been converted into a shopping mall. You can still see tame bullfighting, they don't harm the bulls, in some parts of southern France. Welcome to Madrid's Golden Triangle, or you might call it Museum Row. Madrid has 3 famous museums grouped in this area, each of which deserves its own video. So all we're going to do today is get a taste of the building and of each collection. The most famous is certainly the Prado. The museum was designed to house the extensive collection of paintings and sculptures that belong to the Spanish crown. Over the years, the Prado has expanded its collection through acquisitions, donations, and legacies. The museum has a rich and diverse art collection. In modern times, royal collections are sometimes looked on with quite a bit of suspicion. You always have to ask yourself where and how was that art collected, and if it was purchased, where did the money come from? Almost every museum I've ever visited has problems with this issue. For now, though, we're going to look past that so we can enjoy the art itself. The collection here includes masterpieces by renowned artists like Francisco Goya, Diego Velázquez, El Greco, Peter Paul Rubens, Titian, and Hieronymus Bosch. This photograph shows you the North or Goya facade, decorated in front with a statue of the master himself. The building you see here was actually designed in 1785 on orders of King Charles III of Spain to house his Museum of Natural History. He later came of the natural history idea and used it to house their collection of painting and sculpture. The building was opened to the public in 1819 with the dual purpose of showing the works belonging to the Spanish crown and showing off to the rest of Europe that Spanish art was every bit as good as any other national school. The second museum in the area goes by the nickname the Queen Sophia. It was established to showcase and promote 20th century art. I expect 21st century art will be included if it hasn't already been. It opened in 1992 and is named after the Dowager Queen Sophia. The museum is actually dedicated to more modern Spanish art and includes works by Pablo Picasso and Salvador Dali. Picasso's famous Guernica, check out a coming video blog devoted exclusively to the backstory of that painting, is one of the most famous works featured. The backstory on the building itself is that this was the site of the first General Hospital of Madrid, established by King Philip II. In the 18th century, King Ferdinand VI decided to build a new hospital here. It was finally closed down in 1969, a year before my first visit, and extensively renovated and added on to. While not particularly stunning, at least in my opinion on the outside, in the 1980s they added on glass towers which stick out like a sore thumb. The third of the gems in the Golden Triangle is the Thyssen-Bornemisza Museum, which is based on a private collection of art selected by the Baron himself and expanded by his son. Unlike the first two museums, its subject matter is neither country nor time limited. It includes an extensive collection of over 1,600 paintings that go from the 13th through the 20th centuries. The collection includes works from various European schools, such as Italian primitives, English, Dutch, German, French, as well as modern and contemporary art. The museum is housed in the Palace of Villahermosa, an example of Madrid's neoclassical architecture. The building has a rich history dating back to the 18th century. Unlike the Queen Sophia, this building was initially designed to display art. The Spanish government acquired the art collection from the Baron's family through a purchase, and they bought the palace from the family that owned it separately. I decided to begin our short, detailed visits with the Thyssen-Bornemisza, not just about the collection, but because it illustrates so graphically a problem faced by nearly every museum on the planet, certainly everyone that I've ever visited: stolen art. The museum offers a comprehensive overview of Western art from the 13th to the 20th century with works like Van Gogh, Monet, and Rembrandt. The museum, like so many others, is not without historical taint. The museum achieved international notoriety in recent years because it refused to return a masterwork by Camille Pissarro that had been stolen by the Nazis. The story is a familiar one to anyone who has visited any of the art museums in Europe or the United States. In 1939, a woman named Lily Kassirer-Neubauer, she was Jewish, needed to flee Germany with her husband. Nazi officials offered the couple $360 and 2 exit visas in exchange for the family's prized possession, this painting, Rue Saint-Honoré, in the afternoon. The Nazis actually stiffed the family for the $360, but allowed them to leave. Considering the fate of so many others at the time, the family probably thought they got off cheap, if not well. After the war, the painting was smuggled into California, although no one knows, or at least nobody is admitting, by whom. While the original owners thought it had been destroyed during the war, it was still secretly hiding in the United States. The painting changed hands a few times before Swiss Baron Hans Thyssen-Bornemisza bought it for $275,000 back in 1976. The Baron clearly thought he was purchasing from a legitimate source. He later sold that piece, along with the rest of his collection, to the Kingdom of Spain in a deal worth $338 million. The country, in turn, opened up the museum, naming it in his honor, where the painting is still displayed to this day. Experts suggest that if it came on the market, it's probably worth between 30 and 40 million US dollars. The heirs wanted the painting back, or possibly just the money. They took the Spanish government, the current owners, to court, but a U.S. appeals court rejected the family's claim, which they have been pursuing for over 20 years. I didn't understand all of the ins and outs of the judge's decision, but it appears the judge may have decided the heirs sued the wrong people. The Spanish government purchased the piece in good faith, along with the rest of the Baron's collection, believing he owned it. Likewise, the Baron also bought it, apparently in good faith, from a dealer, believing he owned it. And there were several other owners before. So there it sits, and it will probably stay there for a very long time. The Queen Sophia Arts Center houses all of the modern art in the city. The big draw of the collection here is Picasso's Guernica. The image you see here is just a reproduction, fairly close, I think, from a tiled wall. The museum holds the rights to the original image, and I didn't want to violate their copyright by taking a picture. I'm also fairly sure a guard would do far worse to me if I had than just wagging a finger. The image of the ruins, this comes from the German State Archives, gives you some idea of how little was left of the city after it was bombed during the Spanish Civil War. I think it's probably the single most impressive piece of modern art in the country. It's huge, chock full of details, and takes a long time just to look at. The backstory is even more interesting, and you can learn a great deal about it next time in my Time for History video blog. In short, the Spanish Civil War was a bloody, awful conflict that cost somewhere between 500,000 and 1,000,000 Spanish lives, military and civilians. Franco won the Spanish Civil War and ruled Spain for another 36 years, blighting both society and the economy until his death in 1975. In the beginning, as he was fighting the war, he was cozying up to Hitler and Mussolini. The two countries used Guernica for target practice. Pablo Picasso was living in Paris at the time and painted the scene for the 1937 World's Fair. Afterwards, it went on tour as a fundraiser for the anti-Franco Republican cause. Guernica went touring, and finally Picasso sent it to the Museum of Modern Art, the old one, not the nifty new building in New York City. It was only after Franco finally died and a democracy was slowly being reestablished that the painting went to Spain. This is Dali's Invisible Man, somewhat less gloomy, at least on the surface. The painting is known for its use of double images and optical illusions, which is characteristic of his style during this time period. Various elements of the landscape, such as the clouds and the ruined architecture, come together to form the figure of the Invisible Man. It also includes recurrent symbols related to things I really didn't need to know about, like Dali's fear of sex, such as the jug woman, and a prowling beast. I like art and I try to be open-minded, but the apparent mindset of the painter here shouts creep to me. This is the Prado. The first thing to keep in mind here is that this place is huge, and there's no way in a 2 or 3 hour stay, which is about as long as I can generally stand, to see even the greatest hits, although goodness knows I did try. Raphael is well represented, and the Cardinal, shown here, seem to me at least to capture not just the obscene richness, but the obnoxious superiority of Vatican functionaries at the time. Nearby was Fra Angelico's Annunciation, which features a relatively crude Garden of Eden scene with a sinful first couple apparently waiting to be served with eviction papers. But the big picture in this area, photos are available for sale in the gift shop, and I think they shoot you if you whip out a camera, was Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. This was said, because of its 3-panel design, to have been originally intended as an altarpiece, but the contents are enough to make me wonder whether that could possibly be true. When I was in college, I remember students having copies of the far right panel, that's the juicy stuff, the one about going to hell, on their dorm room walls. It's actually a 3-paneled piece called a triptych. There's a central image and 2 hinged panels. The outer panels are actually pretty calm. It shows us the day of creation from Genesis, when God created the animals. Bosch chose to do this in black and white. On one side are a naked but discreet Adam and Eve, and the animals are virtuous. Open it up and we see that Bosch's view of humanity went downhill pretty fast. The center panel shows us images of what I think are good time men and girls on a perpetual rave. On the right, it's Dante's Inferno, complete with demons. With a visit to the Prado, the museum has plenty of tours, apps, and guides, which deserve far more time than I could allow. It was time to wrap up the visit to the Golden Triangle, and it's time for us to take a break for some refreshments. Museums vary widely in whether they even include a restaurant or a cafe, in how good the food is, and how much they charge, although usually they are fairly expensive. This is a very busy area. I looked on Google Maps and there are at least 100 restaurants and bars within about a 20-minute walk, which means there's plenty of competition. The most important thing that any museum can offer is proximity to the site. The Prado does allow you to leave and come back for lunch, and that makes leaving feasible. That means that the restaurant or cafe, I picked the self-service cafe, has to compete based as much on taste and value as on location. Sometimes the food is pretty good and reasonably priced. Other times it's pretty terrible or very expensive. In the case of the Prado, I kind of lucked out with a prefix luncheon. It was pretty expensive for just a main course. It was cod with an eggplant-based vegetable blend, bread, and mineral water, but it also tasted pretty good for cafeteria food. Thank you for joining me to visit more of Madrid, including the museum area. Come back next time for another adventure with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide.